strengthen your relationships when you start to move through conflict head on and stop avoiding it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Edgy Entrepreneur, where we're in season 2, which is all about relationships. And we believe that if you want to become your most influential self in your community, at your workplace, and in your home, you need to master the art of creating really positive, strong relationships. As always, we are your co-hosts. I'm Daniel Tribby, a healthcare provider and healthcare entrepreneur, as well as a coach for other healthcare entrepreneurs.
And I'm your co-host, Oriana Guevara. I'm a life and personal performance coach, certified relationship coach, author, and speaker.
Yay, let's get it. So this episode we're going to dive right into. I think this one is a significant conversation for each of you to consider, because it's all about dealing with conflict, right? How is it that you can face conflict head on and in that moment realize you can create stronger relationships by doing so?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that it's the complete opposite, right? Like the norm, I think, is that the belief that conflict actually damages relationships, can break up your relationship, can create irreparable damage. And all of those things, they're not necessarily wrong. But when you look at conflict, like only and exclusively those are the outcomes, meaning damage or unwanted outcomes, you really are missing out on the opportunity of what a blessing conflict can actually be, because conflict can actually not only strengthen your relationship, but actually create greater intimacy with the person or people that you're in relationship with. And when I say greater intimacy, I mean that you get to know one another at a deeper level.
Right, absolutely. And the problem is most people don't know how to engage in what we call healthy conflict, right? Instead, we do things like avoid conflict, or they think if I just don't talk about it, it's fine. It's not a problem, right? And then you let that fester, and now it's no longer just a healthy conflict that we could have resolved. It's become a fist fight, right? Or it's become something more detrimental or serious. So we're going to break down kind of where some of the conflict avoidance things come from, as well as how to tackle healthy conflict, how to have a real conversation with somebody and really express how you feel, why you feel that way, and then a desired outcome, and then work together to continue to resolve that and keep that resolution moving forward.
We'll talk about why people avoid conflict, which I think is probably what's most common. And also, right, we didn't really want to get into the weeds in this episode about what is unhealthy conflict. I think for most people, they know what unhealthy conflict is, right? They know how it can become toxic or damaging to a relationship. So we're going to focus on what is healthy conflict and how do you engage in healthy conflict. And then also what is conflict avoidance, which is really what most people are doing more often than not, right? Like more often than not, people aren't engaging in unhealthy conflict. What they're actually doing is just avoiding conflict altogether, yep. Right? Because of those perceptions that we talked about before about how it can create damage. So what do you think is the number one reason that people
avoid conflict?
It's
fear.
Yeah.
It's obviously fear. So we're scared of, a multitude of things. But I think that the biggest reason is going to be past traumas, and not that we want to talk about past traumas and how to heal those on this episode, but maybe you had an argument somewhere in your past and it didn't go your way, and so now you're like, well, nobody else listens to me, nobody understands me. So you have this long list of, which we don't want to discount, right? Like people have real past traumas, we don't want to discount those. However, your ability to actually deal with conflict can change greatly based upon your fear of conflict.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Your fear of conflict, or your fear of like the process or the outcome, afraid to have the conversation. I think when most people who have made a habit or even a pattern of avoiding conflict, you don't necessarily see yourself as doing that because you are fearful, mm-hmm. right? So, but I want you guys to step back, right? Like if this is your thing, if you find yourself avoiding conflict frequently, the reason that you're fearful is less relevant just to the fact that there is fear there. And avoidance of the conflict, meaning avoiding having the conversation, avoiding bringing up, your boundary or how that thing makes you feel, that's the action that you're choosing as a result of your fear of engaging in what in your mind maybe is a confrontation. And I want to also draw that distinction that addressing conflict with somebody doesn't have to be a confrontation, right?
Exactly.
Because that sounds so aggressive, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, not at all. And I think what people have done, you mentioned action, right? Like you are choosing inaction, which I don't care how you frame it, that is a choice that you made not to act in a way that would resolve anything or move you forward. That's a choice you made to suppress or hold yourself down or not want to experience any sort of past trauma that had to come up, or you don't want any friction with that person. And so you just suppress and you swallow it. And we all know that the longer you do that, the longer you give away pieces of yourself, the longer you give away pieces of your boundary, eventually that comes to blows, right? And we've all heard the whole, the pot overflows or the boils over type of situation. And that's what you're doing. You're making a conscious choice to avoid conflict. It is a choice. All right. It's not people think, I didn't do anything about it. That's a choice. It's still an action that you took. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. I want to I want to express some, empathy and compassion for the fact that when that fear strikes and your brain gets hijacked, right, you're going to go into fight, flight, or freeze.
Right.
And the avoidance is the freeze response, right? But we're talking about this because if you can recognize that you're going into one of these different types of hijacked types of reactions is really what it is, right? Like you're becoming reactionary. Your reaction is avoiding, and to choosing not to engage as a result of that response in your nervous system, right? I want to have compassion for the fact that that is really real. And also when you recognize that you're doing that thing, then you can choose to do something else.
Yeah.
Right? You can choose to use some of your tools, hopefully some of the tools that we'll be giving you today during this episode to actually take a different course of action that would actually not only benefit you, but support you in getting your needs met, right? I think a lot of people who engage in conflict avoidance, what they're doing is they're avoiding bringing the conflict to the surface between themselves and the other person, but what they don't realize is that they're never actually avoiding that conflict. The conflict still occurs. What they're doing is they're creating that conflict inside of themselves.
Right.
Right. So, from within, they're repeating to themselves all the things that they could have, should have, would have said.
Right.
Right. If only they had had the courage to come and bring it up to that person. Right. So I want you to realize that, right? If you're avoiding conflict, you're never actually avoiding. You're just creating the conflict inside of yourself.
Mm-hmm. And then I think the other side of that coin is that as you continue to hold that inside and create that internal conflict, it's got to come out at some point.
At some point.
And if you've never mentioned the problem that you've had prior to, and now it comes out after so much time of suppression, it comes out very aggressively. It comes out very offensively. And sometimes the other person goes, well, why didn't you just tell me that the first time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And their question is valid.
Right. Like, why didn't you just tell me the first time? Well, I just held it in and I don't want to, I'm a Sagittarius and my signs didn't line up at that point for me to be able to tell you. Give me the horse shit, guys. You've got to stop with the avoidance, right? So another point outside of fear is conflict avoidance due to mismatch in belief systems. Okay. So if you, we see this right now in the world entirely in every way, shape, form, or fashion, right? If you don't believe exactly what I believe, then you are a insert negative derogatory term.
Right.
Right. And so the problem with that is that just because we have different beliefs doesn't mean we can't seek to understand the perspective that each other has, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is also part of maybe avoiding conflict or just choosing not to engage. It's well, I believe what I believe. You can believe what you want to believe. And I'm just not even going to, spend my time or energy
defending my position.
Yeah. Right. Another part of that is I think that a lot of people, they don't want to consider that another possible thing could also be true.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
That another so-called, reality could exist besides the one that they're in. Right. I want to be really careful about using the word truth because, this idea that truth is relative is also creating a lot of complexities in communication. Truth is truth and different realities exist for different people based on your belief systems.
Yeah.
Right. So, that there's this such thing called cognitive dissonance. right? And so if I'm entrenched in my reality and then you come and present me with another reality and that challenges mine, I am going to experience what's called cognitive dissonance, which is my brain is basically going like, wait, no, what the fuck? Like my reality, if that's true, my reality can't exist or is threatened now, right? And so it activates people's nervous system. This is part of the reason that you see so much, I guess, like aggression, on social media and in other places where people are having conversations about belief systems that are really polarizing. And then we talk about this idea of pick your battles.
Yeah.
I think we can't have this conversation without that coming up for people. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's such a caveat phrase, right? So it is pick your battles. Okay, so we could say, yes, pick your battles, but pick your battles could very easily mean that I am going to avoid certain things because I don't want to talk about them. Right? But if you're going to pick a battle to fight, the battle worth fighting is the battle that entrenches or encroaches on your boundary. Okay? So this is where that distinction has to be made, right, Coach?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I say is that anytime my boundary is encroached upon in a way that makes me feel, something like not positive, then that's worth having the conversation. Right, with the person that I am engaged with. Why? Because this is the reason, guys, because I want you to consider that many of you are using the statement, pick your battles, or I choose my battles wisely. Like many of you are using that as a front for avoidance.
Right.
And so what I want to say is you should be choosing every single battle that infringes on any topic or issue that infringes on your boundaries. Here's why. Because anytime that you allow your boundaries to get infringed upon and you don't reinforce them by communicating to the person that that's a boundary for you and you don't hold people accountable to your boundaries, you start building up resentment.
Right.
Resentment is like the number one sign that you've not clearly communicated your boundaries and that you're not holding people accountable to them. Right. And so here's the thing. If you care about the person that you're in relationship with, then you would be communicating every single time that they inadvertently infringe on your boundary. Not because you want to be an ass or be a nag or whatever you want to call it, even though it can feel like that sometimes, but because you care about that person enough to not want to build up resentment towards them.
Absolutely. And I don't think from a picking your battle standpoint, the other side of that is let's not nitpick people to death on stupid shit, right? So, I left the light on by accident. You left this on, you left that on too, you did this, you did, and then you start nitpicking at little bitty ass things that really aren't relevant. You're creating barriers at that point, right? And so if you guys want to know more about like boundary creation, we're going to talk more about boundaries and resentment here in a second. But if you really want to dive more into boundaries versus barriers, we do have an episode in this season. It is actually episode 2 of this season in The Edgy Entrepreneur called Boundaries versus Barriers. So definitely go check it out. But what you're going to notice inside of your boundaries is that the number one sign that you're allowing your boundaries to become infringed on is you have resentment to that person. You feel resentment. And that resentment is because your ass didn't communicate the boundary or you didn't hold the other person accountable to that boundary.
Yeah. And I recognize like some people aren't communicating their boundary because they don't even know that they have a boundary, right? So that's one thing. You're just not conscious about the fact that that was a boundary for you until you felt the pain point, right? Because when somebody touches up on your boundary, it feels like an ouch, right? It doesn't feel good.
Right.
So either they don't know what their boundaries are or they don't even know that they're entitled to have boundaries within the context of that particular relationship.
Absolutely.
And that might be the relationship with a parent, right? And you're, the adult child of a parent. You can have boundaries with your parent now as an adult, right? You probably need to, if it's a work relationship, if it's a partnership, if it's a friend,
right?
A lot of people have really weak boundaries within their friendships, platonic friendships. And for those reasons, those relationships also struggle, right? So again, check out that episode because it's going to be really helpful and lays a continuous foundation for what we're talking about today, which is how to engage in healthy conflict and specifically how healthy conflict can actually strengthen your relationships. So let's get into more detail about healthy conflicts, Coach.
Absolutely. So it's much easier to have a healthy conflict when you have shared values with the person you have a conflict with, right? So we've talked about values all the time, and then having similar visions and things like that. And from the aspect of finding a romantic partner that you share similar visions or similar values with, from hiring people that you share values with, right, to engaging in tribes or circles of people, communities that you share similar values with. And when you have similar values, if you've created an atmosphere of people around you that have similar values, it's a lot easier to deal in healthy conflict, because the expectation is you're going to bring to me accountability when I fall short on the things that we agreed upon were values.
Yeah. Well, when you're part of these communities of shared values, you all have a vested interest in the health of the community overall. And the health of the community overall is contingent on the health of the individuals and the relationships between those individuals, right? So when you have the opportunity to be part of these communities and have like a solid value system, again, which we've talked about at length in our podcast episodes, but when you have this solid value system, you attract people whose values match yours. Your relationships become much stronger, much faster, and create a greater level of depth and intimacy in those relationships. And therefore, again, when you start to build like a group of these types of people around you, or a family system, you start to all have a vested interest in making sure that it works and making sure that the system as a whole is healthy.
Right.
And that's a great community and tribe to be a part of. And as you mentioned, Coach, you help to hold one another accountable. But you can't do that if you're avoiding conflict.
Very true. Right? So what I heard you say was that the first part of healthy conflict starts before the conflict even happens.
Absolutely.
Right? And that is deciding what your values are way beforehand, what your vision is, and then aligning yourself with people who share those similar types of values, behaviors, and vision, right? So there's your first step. Before the conflict even begins, you need to understand those key things, okay? So, and then, I think that what people need to understand too is healthy conflict comes from vested interest in each other, right? So you and I do this podcast together. We have a business together that's centered around this podcast. So I have vested interest in the business. I have vested interest in you succeeding. So you have vested interest in me succeeding, because when you succeed, I succeed. When I succeed, you succeed. The business succeeds. Everybody's happy, right? So when you have vested interest in somebody or a business, it's a lot easier to have conversations around conflicted issues, right? Because we're vested in each other. We have an interest for succession, or for succeeding,
Yeah. Well, and you can lay that groundwork. Like that's literally what people refer to as a foundation in a relationship, right? You can lay that groundwork early on when you start to discuss what matters to you. Here's what matters to me. Here's what I want to focus on. These are my strengths, right? This is where I would like support in a partnership, whether it's a business partnership or a romantic relationship, right? And you start to communicate your boundaries. You start to communicate, expectations. Are they realistic or not? Right. And in these communications, in this process of getting to know one another and laying this foundation, both people should be feeling seen, heard, and understood and respected. And you create this expectation of accountability where you talked about, right? So
right. Absolutely.
That brings us to some of the aspects of healthy conflict resolution. So think about this. Like, you've laid this great foundation for your relationship with this person, right? And this could be anybody. This could be your child. This could be a friendship. This could be, it doesn't have to be a romantic partnership or a relationship where the stakes are really high necessarily. It could be, you're, again, a friend, even a neighbor, right? You do this to some degree when you are conscious about community building and consciously constructing the relationships around you. These are the kinds of things you engage in. So when it comes to the aspects of healthy conflict resolution, one of the first things that you need to be able to have is a willingness.
Yeah, willingness to engage with that person. Right?
Yeah.
You have to be willing to have that conversation, right? There is a desire that's in you for resolution.
Right. And that drives you to have the conversation rather than avoid having the conversation, which is difficult, or where you might struggle to articulate yourself, right? You choose to actively engage and to have the conversation with somebody, right?
Yeah, I'm willing to engage because I desire resolution before we get to a level of severe breakdown.
Correct.
Right? So
right.
I want to have this conversation with you before this goes any further and I lose my shit, right? So I want to have the conversation because I don't want to seek to one-up you.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to have the situation where now because you did something to me, I'm going to do some bullshit to you and we're going to go on this rodeo back and forth, right, in a very passive aggressive way.
Yeah.
I don't want to have that type of relationship. I have a willingness to resolve the problem before it gets to that point, and ultimately so we don't have to abandon the relationship. Right. If I care about you and the livelihood of our podcast and our business, then I'm going to come to you when I have a problem and be willing to discuss the problem with you because I value the relationship, right? I'm vested in the relationship like we mentioned already, and I don't want to get to a point where now I'm so pissed that I don't want to have shit to do with you.
Yeah, which is what resentment does, right? Resentment tells you all day, every day, like, pull the ripcord, right? I'm getting out of here.
Absolutely.
And what you don't realize the whole time is that your resentment is yours.
Right.
That you created it, right? And that you're holding on to resentment because, not because somebody gave it to you and said, here, hold this. You're holding on to resentment because you did not speak your mind when you had the opportunity to, or timely when a situation came up that pushed your boundary, right?
Yep, very good.
So what about active listening, right? So once we're willing to engage, then what?
This is one of my pet peeve things. People talk about active listening and what they're talking about is mirroring. Okay, so I say, I'm mad because you showed up late to a meeting.
And then I would say, what I hear you saying is that you're mad because I showed up late to a meeting. Did I get that right?
No fucking shit. Like that's duh. So this is not... So that is mirroring, and that is basic level active listening. I don't even consider it in the realm of active. That's
basic.
That's the prequel to active listening, okay? When you're actively listening, you have to label what the other person says. So let's play this again. So I would say to you, I'm mad because you showed up late to an important meeting.
Yes, and I would say it sounds like you are frustrated with me because I showed up late and you might be feeling like I disrespected your time.
That is exactly what labeling is. So she took what I said and she labeled it in a different way to let me know that I understood it. If she was wrong, I would say, no, I'm not frustrated. I'm fucking pissed. And now again, she would say,
okay, so I understand that you are pissed about me being late to this important meeting. What else would you like me to know about what you're feeling right now?
Right. And so this is active listening. She's showing that she understands what I'm feeling, is empathetic to it, is not denying what I feel, right? A lot of us tend to stand in our own circle. Well, you don't understand what's going on in my life, and I was late this morning because my dog pissed on the floor, like whatever it might be. But in that moment, do I care? And I will not care until she shows me that she has empathy or that she's listening to how I feel. Only then will I be receptive to what she has to say as for her reasons for not being there on time.
The perspective or the point of view of that individual that is upset, that might be you sometimes, that might be somebody else, right? You want to just be conscious that the person who's angry, right? Especially if they're angry and directing their anger at you, that person's point of view is all they can see in that moment, right? And they're not going to be able to see your point of view until they know that their point of view has already been seen and understood by you, right? So don't assume that the only point of view that exists and is relevant is your own and try to ram it down that person's throat, right? They have their perspective and their point of view. In this scenario, it was maybe about feeling disrespected and being alone in a setting where there was an important meeting and then had been preset an expectation of another person's presence, right? That matters. Every single detail of it is relevant and matters. Right?
And every single person's perspective is multidimensional.
Exactly.
Right. So it's deeper than just like you heard Coach Oriana say that, I can tell you're frustrated and it sounds like maybe you feel disrespected. So there's another level there. It's not just the frustration. It's how I interpret the frustration and what it means to me, right? It's not just the emotion of being angry or frustrated. It's how I interpret that on a multidimensional level, right? Did it break the trust? Did it make me feel disrespected? Did I want to choke a bitch? Like what all came together there? Like what are the multi dimensions of that feeling? It's more than just the emotion of frustration or anger.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And so while we're on emotions, right, what I want to mention is the need in healthy conflict resolution to show up vulnerable, right? It's a vulnerable expression on both sides. It's not just like, this is why avoidance is also so detrimental, because it doesn't allow you to show up as a vulnerable human being. When you show up in like willing to engage in the conflict, like that means I'm willing to say, this is the impact of your actions on me. This is how it made me feel, right? This is what it brought up for me, right? And to actually get, complete in that conversation by getting yourself to the place with this other individual where you can understand, was that your intention, right? Was your intention for me to feel this way, for me to think this thing, right? And then instead of you just assuming that that was their intention, and again, becoming angry, letting yourself be hurt, maybe not allowing yourself to communicate that you're hurt, or if you communicate that you're hurt, communicating it in a reactive way.
Yeah.
Right? Which isn't going to get you the outcome that you desire, right? We always, when we get reactive, this is again, the hijacking of the brain, right? We get reactive and we think that screaming or shouting somebody down is actually going to allow us to be heard, and it does not. It never gets you to the place where you are wanting to be, which is a feeling of being whole and complete through and getting all the way through the conflict cycle.
Yeah.
So when you're willing to show up vulnerable, right, then you show up with the feeling, with the emotion, right? And we'll give another example shortly about what that would look like, right? But that's important.
So another role we have to discuss inside of vulnerability are the gender differences, right? And I know this is a little bit of a fun conversation because, there is a difference between men and women. And for all of you thinking, oh, here comes the toxic masculinity thing, bear with me for a second, okay? Because I want you to understand the way that men communicate with each other versus the way women communicate with each other versus the way men and women communicate with each other, okay? So two men can have an all-out brawl boxing match and 10 minutes later be having a beer, all right? I don't believe it's the same way with women. Correct me if I'm wrong, Coach.
It's a little less common, to say the least.
Okay. Right, because the one woman could think another woman said something bad about her and they would be the worst of enemies forever, right? So we have to understand that gap, right? That difference between the way each of us communicates, especially from a vulnerability standpoint. Like I think a lot of guys are raw, like rub some dirt on it, get over it. And when you bring that energy to a woman who has a problem, who's being vulnerable with you, it can be very off-putting, right?
Absolutely. That expression of like rub some dirt on it and get over it and, let's stop talking. Is going to show her that you're not emotionally available to create a container or to sustain, the space that she's in, right? Which is, by space, I mean emotion. So, she's going to turn off to you in that case, right? So for the feminine woman, the way to approach that conversation with a man isn't by blaming, it isn't shaming, it isn't yelling or doing anything in your tone or expression that is forceful and directive. Then you will be turning him off to his willingness and openness to engage in that conversation with you. So this is, again, where vulnerability comes in. The best way to engage in a conflict conversation with your man as a feminine woman is to start from the vulnerable place. So you would start by saying something like, I feel sad right now. And then he would theoretically ask you why, right?
Well, why are you feeling that way? What did I do?
Yeah.
What did I do now? Right.
I mean, hopefully he receives that from a heart-centered place. But again, you have to come from a heart-centered place if you want him to receive you from the heart-centered place. So you would start with your emotion and your vulnerable expression. I feel really sad right now. He would then likely ask you, why do you feel sad? Which means he's opening up the space for the conversation to happen. So when he leads you into the conversation, then your next expression is factual information about what happened, right? When you said that you didn't want to do X, right? That made me think. Here comes logic. That made me think, whatever that made you think, right? When you said you didn't want to see my family this weekend, that made me think that my family is not a priority for you. Your man cannot address your feeling or emotion. Your feeling or emotion is yours, and you're only feeling it because you think the thing. He doesn't care about my family. My family's not a priority for him. That thought created the emotion of sadness. So if you're just going to go to your man and present him with the vulnerable emotion, I feel sad because you didn't want to go to see my family this weekend, he's not going to be able to address it and get complete with you. Possibly without giving in, which is not going to feel good to him, giving in to what you want, which is you want him to go see your family, right? He's going to have to, and in that process, you're leading and you're emasculating if you're leading, right? So there's a lot of really, nuanced things to communication, particularly in a romantic relationship, but always in relationships between men and women, that both genders, both parties would be more likely to get their needs met and to get what they want out of these interactions and to build greater depth and intimacy in the relationship if they knew how to communicate better.
Right.
Right.
And gentlemen, your volume plays a role here. If she comes to you and says, and let's even extend this into the workplace, hey, the other day in the meeting, it made me feel sad when you called me out in front of the team because it made me think that you don't value the work that I do here. Right? And so now, if this is a woman coming to her male counterpart, boss, manager, leader, whatever, and his response is one of very stern, very bang the gavel, very managerial, non-leadership style, right? That's not going to win anything, anywhere, and it's not going to help resolve any sort of conflict, right? Gentlemen, you have to be able to listen to that and understand it. And you cannot argue with it. There's no point in my mind of you arguing with, well, it should have made you feel that way because that's not how I meant it. You're a dumbass, okay? You need to accept the fact that you made somebody feel that way. Hey, look, I'm sorry that I made you feel that way. That was not my intention, okay? Then you can explain yourself, all right? Then you can move to find resolution in that. But if you come back guns blazing because your desire is just to overstep somebody because you feel like you're a male and you have the right to do so, you're in the wrong place in the wrong role.
Yeah, I mean, really what you have the opportunity to address is what the person thinks. Right? You're going to meet their logic with logic, right? You can't change what they feel. You can't change the facts about what happened. All you can say is, my intention was actually this, right? Or, in your example, like my intention wasn't to make you feel devalued. My intention was just to create a learning opportunity for the entire group, right? And to set a clear expectation. I'm sorry that I did that in a public setting. Thank you for letting me know your boundary. I won't call you out in front of the team again, right? And so you can see there that the person can actually do something about what you're telling them. It made me think this thing, that you don't value me or that you don't prioritize my family, right? They can do something about what you think. They can't do something about what you feel. You own your emotions.
It's true. It's very, very true. And herein lies, ladies and gentlemen, the ability to have a real conversation that leads to conflict resolution versus one that says, well, what the fuck is the point for me to go talk to him? He's not going to listen to me anyway. Or I'm not going to talk to her. She's not going to listen. She doesn't care what I think. And anytime I'm vulnerable with her, she uses it against me later. Okay? So, and I want everybody to understand there's differences in the way that we communicate as men and as women. And you need to be in touch with that if you really, really want to have positive conflict resolution. So in other words, vulnerability means holding space. You mentioned this earlier, holding space, but I want to touch on it just a little bit more so people understand. What does it mean to hold space for somebody?
Yeah, holding space means just allowing yourself to be present in that moment when that person is in their emotion, right? For most people, witnessing someone else in their emotion makes them so uncomfortable that they actually want them to stop. And so they'll say things like, let's talk about this later when you're less emotional. or stop crying. You don't need to cry. Please stop crying here. Like they start to coddle in that effect, right? Let a person be in their emotion in the moment. As long as it's not personally threatening towards you, as long as it's not threatening your emotional or your physical safety, if a person wants to cry, let them cry. You don't have to cry with them. You're just being present. You don't even have to put your hand on their shoulder or pat their back or hug them or do anything. I actually suggest against all of those things. Do none of those things, right? Leave them alone and just let them be in their vulnerable expression of their emotion, however they want to express that. Most people actually never have the opportunity to actually have someone witness them in their, let's say in their anger, in their frustration, in their upset, in their, emotional pain, without having somebody like try to swoop in and run to the rescue and, no, stop, no, please don't. Like, just leave a person alone. The most respectful thing that you could do for somebody who's in an emotional or vulnerable space is just give them the space to feel it.
Some of you may be thinking, what if somebody's really angry and they come into the manager's office at work and they explode, right? And they're just firing off the hinges. How do you handle that type of situation, right? And I would encourage, again, in that moment, you hold space for them. You let them go off and do what they need to do in an explosive manner. And then when they're done, I usually will just look at them and say, I can tell that you're super angry, frustrated, pissed off, all of the things. And I really want to understand more about it, but I think maybe you need some time to let some of your anger go before we can actually move to resolve the problem. Because in this state, we're not going to be able to communicate. So I'm going to hold the space for you and understand your anger. And also, we need to be able to have a real conversation about this in a state where the emotion is not the primary drive for us correcting the problem.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I would say further, if you're in a position to find yourself in that situation, then and that's in your professional setting, you probably should get some training on conflict resolution and mediation skills that could support your ability to do that well in the workplace. Right. Otherwise, there's a lot of other relationship texts and books when these relationships are either with your kids. And we all know, teenagers and young adults can have explosive emotions because they have big emotions that they don't know what to do with them. They don't know how to handle them. And the best thing you could do as a parent or a friend or aunt and uncle is learn how to hold space for that young adult, which will teach them how to manage their emotions. And so there's a lot of books and a lot of things you can do to learn how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the world of effective communication skills, essentially what you need to understand is people want to be heard and understood. Mm-hmm. Okay, heard and understood. And you will not be able to move towards your resolution until those people know that you understand how they feel and how that feeling inspired a thought process is inside them, okay? So out of our 3 steps, we've gone over 2. First one was the willingness or the desire to resolve the conflict before the breakdown really happens or a severe breakdown happens. Second one was effective communication skills. And now our third one is actually moving to the resolution.
Yep.
So in this point, okay, we've listened, I've heard, I've told my side, and now we need to mutually resolve and understand how we're going to move forward. Right? So what do we do first in that moment?
Yeah. So you're looking to create a win-win, right? Which is synergy, which means we both are growing, learning, coming out, with ahead as a result of engaging in the conflict, right? Neither one of us are losing. Neither one of us are giving something up or giving something away and walking away from that as a so-called loser while the other one walks away as a winner. Right. Or the other analogy would be one of us was right and the other one was wrong. So just get that out of your head right now. If you think that healthy conflict includes somebody coming out on top as a winner and the other one walking away as a loser, that's not how this works. Right. If you're looking for more information, check out our episode called Synergy versus Compromise, which is actually the first episode in season 2 of Edgy Entrepreneur. Yeah. And you can find more information. But
right. And I love what you said in that episode. I'm going to reiterate it here. I love what you said about compromise in that episode. You said that compromise is nothing more than negotiating sorrow, right?
Oh, negotiating suffering.
Suffering, sorrow. Yeah, so you're negotiating suffering at that point. So compromise is not what you want. Synergy is. So Coach said season 2, episode 1 for synergy versus compromise will give you some good tips on how to create a win-win situation.
Yeah. So in this process of moving to resolution, thank you for that, Coach, you have the opportunity to do a few things. One of the things you get to do is set a boundary for the future, right? In the future, if this should happen again, right, or anything like this is how I'm going to react, right? I'm going to do this.
Yep. And again, boundaries are for you, not for other people. Okay. So, in other words, if you continue to put me on display in front of the team in a negative manner to which it makes me feel like you don't value me, I will respond by throwing you the deuces, packing up my shit, and leaving. Right? So that's an extreme case, but I'm telling you this because you're crossing my boundary. Okay. And that boundary is for me. I don't want to feel unvalued, okay, unappreciated. And if I feel that way, I'm going to leave. You don't have to change anything. You don't. You can keep on doing what you're doing. I'm just letting you know that when you continue to do that, this is how it makes me feel. And I will be happy to find another workplace that doesn't do that to me.
Yeah. So that's one thing that you could be doing in this conflict resolution conversation. Ideally, you would have done this next thing already, right? But
Right.
if not, if you haven't already done it, when you have this healthy conflict conversation with somebody, you can set an agreement or make what I would suggest are multiple, at least baseline agreements. Meaning, this is what an agreement means. We agree that the next time that there's a conflict between us, we will handle it in a certain way. So you're actually creating rules for engagement, essentially. For in the future, if or when either this or something else comes up, a conflict, the rules of engagement are, right? You decide what they are. The caveat there is that you both have to be in agreement of what the rules are, and you both have to agree to them, right? You agree that you will abide by them, right? So it could be, some of the things that I recommend when I work with couples is like no yelling, right? Come to an agreement that you're never going to yell. You're never going to raise your voice. You're never going to call each other names. No name calling, right? Like things that are relevant to fighting dirty, right? And like no storming out, no abandonment, right? Those are 3 very baseline, basic decency types of agreements that you could have in every single relationship that you have with people. And again, the more you have shared values, the more likely these are just kind of to be your default way of responding to conflict, right?
Right, exactly. And if you're looking for synergy, if you're outlining boundaries, if you're making agreements, what you've just done is outlined expectations for how to proceed in the face of conflict going forward, or even being able to avoid a more serious version of the conflict.
Correct.
Right? So I'm not saying avoiding the resolution for the conflict, avoiding discussing the conflict. I'm saying avoiding the conflict entirely.
Right.
Right? So the conflict doesn't exist, because we have set these rules, right, into place, or these boundaries that now allow us to have expectations of each other and understand, hey, this is how we're going to communicate. And when we don't communicate, it throws us out of alignment, which means we're not going to do our best work together, whether that's office setting, home setting, community setting. So I desire to do my best work with you. So I want to meet some expectations here so that we can continue to jive, right?
Right. Yeah. And through these methods of resolution, by having these things in place, you can engage in healthier conflict. You can resolve conflict quicker. And I think more importantly than all, you can get over that like impact, that shock that conflict creates, right? Which is like in a romantic relationship, it's like for a few hours or for some people, maybe even days, like, I don't really want to talk to you. I don't really want to engage with you. Kind of like, don't really touch me. like your foot is floating over to my side of the bed. So just, I need you to scoot over. Like that kind of bullshit.
Right. Why is there a pillow between us?
Right. So, it minimizes that time frame after an argument that's kind of like awkward and lanky and weird until you actually return to your heart-centeredness in a relationship and like embrace, right? That's called the return to love. So, you can actually get through that entire cycle really fast when you do some of the things that we are suggesting here today.
Yeah. Absolutely. So anything else on this whole conflict resolution topic?
Not on this topic.
Did we squeeze the juice out of this one today?
Squeeze the juice out of it. That's
Good deal.
But I did want to invite people to join us in the Edgy Entrepreneur Facebook community, where we're having conversations like these and many others on different topics relevant not only to relationships, but also to your business growth and your personal self-mastery and progress. And if you text the word EDGY, EDGY, to 33777, you'll get a link to join the Facebook group.
Absolutely. Tons of free value in there. We're live every week, and we throw out lots of great nuggets, and you have access to the blog and all those things. So if you want more free value, more free content, that is the place to go. So we love supporting you on your self-mastery, business mastery journeys here. So thanks so much for joining us again. This is the Edgy Entrepreneur, and we look forward to talking to you guys again in the next couple weeks.